Jake Morrison sat at his desk deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, watching the screens that showed empty space around Earth. He had been doing this job for 5 years now, and nothing interesting ever happened. The coffee was cold, and his eyes were tired from staring at the same boring displays all night. That changed at exactly 3:47 in the morning. "Sir, I'm getting something weird on the long-range sensors," said Lisa Grant from her station across the room. She was the best communications officer they had, and Jake trusted her completely. Jake walked over to look at her screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of huge objects were moving toward Earth from deep space. They were big, much bigger than anything humans had ever built. "Get me Ryan Cole on the phone right now," Jake said, his voice steady but urgent. Ryan was their best person for figuring out what alien technology could do. Within 10 minutes, Ryan was running into the command center, still wearing his pajamas under a hastily thrown-on jacket. He looked at the screens, and his face went pale. "Those ships are massive," Ryan said, pointing at the largest blip on the screen. "That one has to be at least 3 miles long. And they're not using any technology we understand." Jake picked up the red phone that connected him directly to the president. This was not a drill anymore. 2 hours later, every major city on Earth was watching the sky. The alien ships had moved into orbit around the planet, and they were visible even without telescopes. They looked like giant metal spears hanging in space. It's dark and threatening. On the largest ship, War Master Kreeth stood before a huge window, looking down at the blue and green planet below. He was 7 feet tall with gray skin and 4 arms, each ending in sharp claws. His people, the Zephyrians, had conquered 43 worlds using the same simple plan every time. "Deploy the Ravagers," Kreeth commanded in his harsh voice. "Make them fear us before we land our armies." The Ravagers were his secret weapon. Each one was 12 feet tall and weighed as much as a small car. They looked like bears mixed with rhinoceros, covered in thick armor-like skin that could stop bullets. Their claws were as long as kitchen knives and twice as sharp. Most importantly, they were programmed to kill everything that moved. Kreeth had used them on every world he conquered. The local populations would see these monsters tearing through their cities and give up without a real fight. It saved time and made conquering much easier. In New York City, Marine Lieutenant Sam Brooks was having lunch in Central Park when the sky suddenly filled with streaks of light. At first, people thought they were meteors. Then the impact started. The first Ravager crashed through the roof of a coffee shop 6 blocks away. Sam heard the screaming before he saw the creature. When he finally got close enough to see what was happening, he could barely believe his eyes. The thing was huge and covered in what looked like natural armor. It was throwing cars around like toys and seemed completely unstoppable. Sam watched a police officer empty his entire gun into the creature's chest. The bullets bounced off like they were hitting a brick wall. "Fall back," Sam shouted into his radio, but he knew it was probably useless. How do you fight something that bullets can't even scratch? 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles, Dr. Kate Williams was in her veterinary clinic when the ground started shaking. She ran outside and saw something that would give her nightmares for weeks. A Ravager was walking down Sunset Boulevard. Nothing was stopping it. The creature moved with surprising speed for something so big. Kate watched as it grabbed a city bus and threw it into a building like it weighed nothing. People inside. The bus didn't have a chance. "What is that thing?" her assistant Jenny asked, hiding behind a parked car. Kate didn't answer because she didn't know. In all her years studying animals, she had never seen anything like this. It moved like a predator, but it seemed to be killing just for the sake of killing. No animal she knew acted that way without a reason. Around the world, the same scene was playing out in every major city. London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sydney. Everywhere the Ravagers landed, human resistance crumbled within hours. The creatures seemed to be unstoppable. In the Pentagon, General Bob Phillips was getting reports from every major military base in the world. The news was all bad. "Conventional weapons are useless, sir," reported Colonel Steve Murphy. "We've hit them with everything from handguns to tank shells. Nothing even slows them down. What about aircraft? The general asked. Same result. F-16s can't penetrate their hide, and they're fast enough to jump up and grab low-flying helicopters. Heck. In Cheyenne Mountain, Jake Morrison was coordinating with military leaders around the globe. The picture was getting worse by the hour. We've lost contact with downtown Chicago, reported Lisa Grant. And the creatures in Miami have reached the airport. Ryan Cole was frantically studying the video feeds from around the world, trying to find some weakness in the creatures. There has to be something, he muttered to himself. Every animal has a weakness. On his ship in orbit, War Master Kreeth was pleased with the progress. The humans were reacting exactly like every other, the species he had conquered. Fear, panic, and complete military collapse within the first day. How long before they surrender? Asked his second-in-command, a smaller Zephyrian named Vex. Give them 3 days, Kreeth replied confidently. Maybe less. Once they see that, resistance is hopeless. They'll beg us to stop. But Kreeth had made a mistake that would cost him everything. He assumed that humans would react like every other species he had faced. He didn't understand that humans were different in one very important way. They adapted faster than any species he had ever encountered. In a small town in Montana, rancher Pete Johnson was watching the news with growing anger. His cattle dogs, Rex and Lady, were hiding under the kitchen table, scared by the sounds coming from the television. Bulletproof monsters? Pete said to his wife Mary. We'll see about that. Pete had been hunting and ranching for 30 years. He knew that every animal, no matter how tough, had weak spots. He just had to find them. Around the world, other humans were having similar thoughts. The initial shock was wearing off, and people were starting to think instead of just running. Engineers were looking at the creatures and seeing problems to solve. Scientists were studying them and looking for weaknesses. Soldiers were regrouping and planning new strategies. The Zephyrians had no idea what was coming. 3 days after the Ravagers landed, Pete Johnson was fixing his fence when he heard a loud crash from the north pasture. Rex and Lady started barking like crazy, but they didn't run toward the sound like they usually did when something was wrong. Instead, they stayed close to Pete. Whining and looking nervous, Pete grabbed his rifle and walked carefully toward the noise. What he found changed everything. A Ravager was lying on its side near the old oak tree. The creature was breathing hard and had a large gash on its left shoulder. Green blood was leaking from the wound, and Pete could see something metal sticking out of the creature's neck. It looked like some kind of device. The strangest thing was how the Ravager was acting. Instead of trying to kill everything in sight, it just lay there making soft whimpering sounds. It reminded Pete of a hurt cow that had gotten separated from the herd. Rex, the braver of Pete's 2 dogs, slowly walked toward the creature. Pete expected the Ravager to attack, but instead it just looked at Rex with what almost seemed like sadness. Lady followed Rex, and soon both dogs were sitting near the massive creature, not afraid anymore. Well, I'll be damned, Pete said too. Himself 2,000 miles away in Los Angeles, Dr. Kate Williams was having the busiest week of her career. The government had set up a temporary research center in an old warehouse, and they were bringing her every piece of Ravager they could find. Most of the pieces came from creatures that had been killed by explosives or heavy machinery. The military had figured out that while bullets bounced off the Ravagers, dropping a building on them or hitting them with a bulldozer could do some damage. Kate was examining a piece of the armor-like skin when her assistant Tony Clark came running over with a tablet in his hands. Kate, you need to see this, Tony said, breathing hard. I've been analyzing the brain scans from the dead creatures, and I found something incredible. Tony showed her the tablet screen. It displayed a detailed image of a Ravager's brain with several areas highlighted in red. Look at this section here. Tony pointed to a large red area. This is the part of the brain that controls social behavior in pack animals. It's huge, much bigger than it should be for a solitary predator. Kate looked more closely at the image. Are you saying these things are supposed to be social creatures? Not just social, Tony said excitedly. Think they're as social as wolves or dolphins. But look at this. He pointed to another part of the brain scan. This area shows signs of artificial chemical interference. Something is suppressing their natural behavior patterns. Kate thought about what she had seen in the videos. From around the world, the Ravagers always attacked alone or in very small groups. They never seemed to work together or show any kind of pack behavior. What if they're being controlled? Kate said. What if this isn't their natural behavior at all? Meanwhile, in Detroit, Army engineer Maria Santos was having her own breakthrough. She had been studying videos of Ravager attacks when she noticed something interesting. Every time a creature was near heavy construction equipment, it seemed to slow down or become confused. Maria had spent 10 years working with industrial equipment before joining the Army. She knew that heavy machinery produced lots of different types of vibrations and electromagnetic fields. Maybe the Ravagers were sensitive to something the machines were putting out. She decided to test her theory. Maria and her team took a modified jackhammer to an area where a Ravager had been spotted. The creature was tearing apart an abandoned building when they arrived. Start the equipment, Maria ordered. Her team turned on 3 different pieces of construction equipment, all tuned to produce vibrations at different frequencies. At first, nothing happened. Then Maria noticed the Ravager stop moving and shake. Its head like it was trying to clear something out of its ears. Increase the frequency on machine 2, Maria called out. When they hit 47.3 kilohertz, the Ravager suddenly stopped attacking and sat down heavily. It looked around in confusion, like it had just woken up from a bad dream. Shut it down, Maria said quietly. I think we just found their weakness. Back in Montana, Pete Johnson was making a discovery of his own. The injured Ravager had been on his property for 2 days now, and Pete had been watching it carefully. The creature seemed to get calmer every day, and the metal device in its neck was sparking occasionally. Pete's neighbor, an electrical engineer, named Bill Harper, came over to look at the device. It's definitely some kind of control implant, Bill said, examining the device through binoculars, and it looks like it's damaged. See how it's sparking? I bet that's why this creature isn't acting aggressive. Pete made a decision that most people would have called crazy. He walked slowly toward the Ravager with a pair of wire cutters in his hand. Rex and Lady followed him, still not showing any fear of the massive creature. The Ravager watched Pete approach, but didn't move to attack. When Pete got close enough, he could see that the metal device was barely hanging on by a few damaged wires. Easy there, big fellow, Pete said softly, the same way he talked to scared cattle. Let's get that thing off your neck. The Ravager held perfectly still while Pete cut the remaining wires. As soon as the device fell to the ground, the creature's whole body seemed to relax. It looked at Pete and made a sound that was almost like a cat purring, but much deeper. Rex walked up to the Ravager and licked its massive paw. The creature gently touched Rex with one claw, being very careful not to hurt the small dog.
Ow.
I'll be damned, Pete said again. You're not a monster at all, are you? You're just a big lost animal who got forced to do bad things. All around the world, humans were starting to make similar discoveries. In Tokyo, an electronics expert figured out how to jam the control signals to the devices. In London, a veterinarian successfully removed an implant from a Ravager and watched it become docile immediately. The most important discovery came from Dr. Kate Williams in Los Angeles, and she and Tony had been working around the clock to understand how the control implants worked. The devices don't just control behavior, Kate explained to the emergency council meeting held by video conference. They pump the creatures full of artificial hormones that make them aggressive and suppress their natural intelligence. What are you saying, Doctor? Asked General Phillips from the Pentagon. I'm saying these creatures aren't our enemies, Kate replied. They're victims just like us. And if we can free them from these control devices, they might even help us fight back against whoever sent them. On his ship in orbit, War Master Kreith was getting reports that confused and angered him. Several Ravagers had gone silent. Their control signals no longer responding. Others were showing behavior patterns that made no sense. How are these primitives disabling our technology? Kreith demanded. His second-in-command Vex looked nervous. The humans seem to be learning much. Faster than expected, War Master? Perhaps we should begin the ground invasion sooner than planned. Kreith slammed his fist on the command console. The Ravagers have never failed before and will not be defeated by these backward creatures. But down on Earth, humans were no longer running in fear. They were learning, adapting, and preparing to fight back. And soon they would have allies that Kreeth never expected. 2 weeks after the first Ravagers landed, former Navy SEAL Danny Foster was leading a team through the ruins of downtown Houston. They had a mission that most people thought was impossible: capture a Ravager alive and remove its control device. Danny's team included Maria Santos, who had brought her frequency generators, and Dr. Kate Williams, who had flown in from Los Angeles with a portable surgery kit designed for large animals. "Target is 3 blocks ahead," whispered Carlos Rivera, Danny's spotter. "Looks like it's alone and distracted by something." Danny looked through his binoculars and saw the Ravager tearing apart an abandoned bus. The creature seemed focused on its destruction, which was perfect for their plan. "Maria, set up your equipment behind that overturned truck," Danny ordered quietly. "Kate, be ready to move in fast once the creature goes down." Maria activated her frequency generators, the same type that had worked in Detroit. The sound was too high for human ears to hear, but Danny could see the effect on the Ravager immediately. The creature stopped attacking the bus and shook its head in confusion. "Increase the frequency," Danny said into his radio. When Maria hit the right frequency, the Ravager sat down heavily and looked around like it was trying to remember where it was. This was their chance. Danny's team moved in quickly but carefully. The Ravager watched them approach but didn't try to attack. Up close, Danny could see the metal device on the creature's neck, just like Pete Johnson had described from Montana.Doctor. Kate Williams approached the Ravager slowly, speaking in a soft, calm voice, like she would use with a scared animal at her clinic. "Easy there, big guy," Kate said gently. "We're going to help you feel better." The Ravager tilted its massive head and made a low rumbling sound. Kate took this as a good sign and moved closer with her medical tools, removing the control device. Took 20 minutes of careful work. The Ravagers had thick skin, but Kate had done surgery on elephants before, so she knew how to work with large, tough animals. The moment the device came off, the change in the Ravager was incredible. The aggressive look in its eyes disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like gratitude. The creature gently touched Kate's shoulder with one massive claw, being very careful not to hurt her. "Hello there," Kate said, smiling. "How do you feel now?" The Ravager made a series of soft sounds that reminded Kate of whales singing. She had a crazy idea and decided to try something. Kate had brought a small device that could produce different sound frequencies. She started playing various tones, watching the Ravager's reaction. When she hit a specific low frequency, the creature's eyes lit up and it responded with the same tone. "Danny, I think it's trying to communicate," Kate said excitedly. Over the next hour, Kate and the Ravager worked out a basic system of communication using different tones and simple gestures. What Kate learned shocked everyone. The Ravager, who Kate started calling Big Ben because of his deep voice, had been a peaceful creature on his home world. His species lived in large family groups and were actually quite intelligent. The Zephyrians had invaded his planet, captured his people, and forced the control devices on them to turn them into weapons. "This is incredible," Kate said into her radio, speaking to the emergency command center. "These creatures are victims, not villains. They've been enslaved and forced to attack against their will." The news spread quickly to other teams around the world. In London, a team successfully freed 3 Ravagers using the same method. In Tokyo, they freed 5 more. Each freed Ravager showed the same pattern: confusion at first, then relief, then a desire to communicate and help. The most amazing discovery came from a team in Chicago, led by Captain Amy Rodriguez. She had freed a group of 6 Ravagers and noticed that they immediately started working together like a pack. When more Ravagers with control devices attacked the area, the freed creatures actually fought to protect the humans who had helped them. "Command, you're not going to believe this," Amy reported during the battle. "The freed Ravagers are fighting alongside my troops against the controlled ones. They're trying to remove the control devices from their own people without hurting them." Back in Montana, Pete Johnson had become an expert at communicating with his Ravager friend, who he called Buddy. Buddy had learned to understand basic English words and could even follow simple commands. More importantly, Buddy had taught Pete something incredible. The Ravagers could communicate with each other across very long distances using sounds low for humans to hear. Buddy was already in contact with other freed Ravagers around the world. "Pete, this changes everything," said Dr. Kate Williams, who had flown to Montana to meet Buddy. "If they can talk to each other across the planet, we can coordinate rescue operations for all the controlled Ravagers." The plan they came up with was brilliant in its simplicity. The freed Ravagers would use their long-distance communication to locate groups of controlled Ravagers. Then human teams would move in with frequency generators to disable the control signals long enough to remove the devices. Within 1 week, they had freed over 200 Ravagers across North America. Each freed creature immediately joined the effort to save their enslaved family members. The biggest success came in New York City, where Marine Lieutenant Sam Brooks was now working with a pack of 12 freed Ravagers. They had developed tactics that combined human technology with Ravager strength and intelligence. "The Ravagers know exactly how their armor works," Sam explained to his commanders. "They can show us weak spots that we never would have found on our own. And when they work together, they're unstoppable." The pack of freed Ravagers could take down a controlled Ravager in minutes without seriously hurting it. They knew exactly where to grab their enslaved family members to hold them still while humans removed the control devices. On his ship in orbit, War Master Kreeth was getting reports that made him furious and confused. "How are they turning our weapons against us?" Kreeth demanded. "The Ravagers are supposed to be mindless killing machines." His second-in-command Vex looked at the reports with growing concern. "War Master, it appears the humans have found a way to remove the control implants. The freed Ravagers are now working with them." "Impossible," Kreeth roared. "No species has ever figured out our control technology. These primitives cannot be more advanced than races we conquered centuries ago." But the evidence was clear. Humans were not only surviving the Ravager attack, they were turning it completely around. Every day, more Ravagers were freed and joined the human side. Kreeth made a decision that would seal his fate. Instead of trying to understand how humans were different from other species, he decided to escalate the attack. "Prepare the orbital bombardment weapons," Kreeth ordered. "If the Ravagers cannot defeat these creatures, we will burn their cities from space." But Kreeth didn't know that humans and their new Ravager allies were already planning something that would end the war in a way he never expected. The freed Ravagers had told their human friends about the Zephyrian ships in orbit, and humans had some very interesting ideas about how to reach them. War Master Kreeth stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the blue planet below with growing anger. In 3 weeks, his perfect conquest plan had turned into a complete disaster. More than half of his Ravagers had been freed by the humans and were now fighting against him. "Begin orbital bombardment of their major cities," Kreeth commanded. "If we cannot control this planet, we will destroy it." His weapons officer hesitated. "War Master, we still have many Ravagers on the surface. The bombardment will kill them too. They are no longer useful to us," Kreeth replied coldly. "Begin firing." But as the Zephyrian ships powered up their weapons, something unexpected happened. Every communication system on Earth started broadcasting the same message on every frequency imaginable. The message came from NASA engineer Ben Cooper, working from a hidden facility in Colorado. Ben had been studying the Zephyrian ships for weeks, using powerful telescopes and radio equipment to figure out how their technology worked. "This is Earth calling all Zephyrian ships," Ben's voice echoed across space. "We know you can hear this. We have something to tell you about your Ravagers." On the Zephyrian flagship, War Master Kreeth was surprised but not worried. What could these primitives possibly tell us about our own weapons? Ben's next words changed everything. "Your Ravagers are not weapons," Ben continued. "They are people. They have families, thoughts, and feelings. They told us about their homeworld and how you enslaved them. They told us about other worlds you conquered using the same methods. And they told us something else, how to contact their families on those other worlds." Kreeth's blood went cold. The Ravagers were not supposed to remember their past lives. The control devices were designed to wipe out all memories and personality on Earth. Dr. Kate Williams was standing next to Big Ben and 12 other freed Ravagers in a circle. Each Ravager was making deep, low sounds that traveled through the ground and into space. The sounds were too low for human ears, but sensitive equipment could detect them traveling incredible distances. "They're calling to their families on other planets," Kate explained into her radio. "All the Ravagers you enslaved on other worlds, they're hearing this call right now. Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds controlled by the Zephyrian Empire, something incredible began to happen. Ravagers who had been forced to guard alien slaves and patrol conquered cities suddenly stopped what they were doing. The call from Earth had awakened memories that the control devices had tried to destroy. On the planet Zarian, a group of Ravagers, guarding a mining operation, looked at each other with growing recognition. On Talos Prime, Ravagers began removing their own control devices by smashing them against rocks. On distant Kepler Station, enslaved Ravagers turned on their Zephyrian masters for the first time in centuries. Back on Earth, Air Force Major Kelly Brooks was leading a desperate mission that most people thought was impossible. She and her team had captured several Zephyrian shuttles that had been damaged during the fighting. Kelly, who had been a test pilot before the invasion, had figured out how to fly the alien ships. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy their main ships," Kelly said to her team over the radio. "We just need to get close enough to use Maria's frequency weapons." Maria Santos had built larger versions of her frequency generators and mounted them on the captured shuttles. If they could get close enough to the Zephyrian ships, they might be able to disable the aliens' control systems, the same way they had disabled the Ravager. Implants. Kelly's squadron of captured alien shuttles launched from a hidden base in Nevada. The Zephyrian ships detected them immediately, but Kreth was confused by what he was seeing. "Why are our own shuttles attacking us?" Kreth demanded. Before anyone could answer, the shuttles were close enough for Maria's weapons to work. Frequency generators sent powerful sound waves through the hulls of the Zephyrian ships. The alien crew members, who had sensitive hearing, overwhelmed by the noise and confusion. More importantly, the frequencies disrupted the Zephyrian communication systems and control networks. Suddenly, Kreth could not contact his other ships or control his weapons. On the surface of Earth, Captain Amy Rodriguez was leading the largest group of freed Ravagers in a final assault on the remaining controlled creatures. But this time, they had help from an unexpected source. The Ravagers, still under Zephyrian control, were fighting against their programming. The call from their freed families was getting stronger, and many of them were beginning to remember who they really were. "Look!" shouted Danny Foster, pointing across the battlefield. "The controlled ones are removing their own devices." Across the planet, Ravagers were breaking free of their mental chains. Some smashed their control devices against buildings. Others worked together to pull the implants off each other. Within hours, there were no enslaved Ravagers left on Earth. But the real victory came from space. The galaxy-wide uprising of freed Ravagers had spread to every world in the Zephyrian Empire. Slave races that had been controlled for centuries were rising up with their Ravager protectors. The entire empire was collapsing. War Master Kreth found himself alone on his flagship, his crew either unconscious from Maria's frequency weapons or too confused to follow orders. His empire was falling apart. And it was all because of one small blue planet that had shown enslaved creatures what freedom looked like. "Surrender," came a voice over his communication system. It was Jake Morrison from Cheyenne Mountain. "Your empire is finished. Your slaves are free. You have lost." Kreth looked out at the stars where his other ships were floating powerless in space, their crews disabled by human frequency weapons. He thought about the reports coming in from across the galaxy, world after world declaring independence as their Ravager guards turned into protectors and friends. "How?" Kreth asked, his voice barely a whisper. "And how did you defeat us so completely?" Jake's answer was simple. "Didn't fight your weapons. We freed your slaves, showed them that they didn't have to be monsters. We gave them back their families." 6 months later, the planet Earth had become something no one could have imagined. The former Zephyrian Empire was now called the Galactic Freedom Alliance, with Earth as its capital. Pete Johnson's ranch in Montana had become an embassy, where humans and Ravagers worked together to plan new colonies on distant worlds. Buddy, Pete's first Ravager friend, is now an ambassador, helping other species learn to live in peace. Dr. Kate Williams ran a research center where humans and aliens shared knowledge about biology and medicine. The Ravagers had taught humans about healing techniques from dozens of different worlds in the former Zephyrian prison camps. War Master Kreeth sat in a simple cell, forced to watch news broadcasts every day. The reports showed something that broke his proud warrior spirit completely: Ravagers. And human children playing together in parks around the world. The creatures he had turned into weapons of fear had become symbols of hope and friendship. The primitive humans had done something his advanced civilization never understood. They had chosen love over fear, freedom over control, and cooperation over conquest. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, other species were learning the same lesson that Earth had taught them. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from fighting your enemies, but from helping them remember who they really are.